Hey, Emma here from Old Town Hip Therapy. This week I'm going to be slightly controversial, so stick with me. You were not born with depression. Yep, I said I was going to be controversial. There is no gene that has ever been found to cause depression. Now I am going to explain these things in a minute. And you don't have to live with depression. Living with depression, or choosing to live with depression, is the subject of an e-guide that has just been launched. You can find a link at the bottom if you are interested in finding out more about that and about how to cure yourself from depression. But simple fact is, you were not born depressed. No baby is born depressed or anxious. It is something that you learn. And you learn from the influences around you in life. Our brain is what they call plastic. They describe it as a plastic brain, which basically means is it is constantly being formed and reformed and wired up differently, and new neural pathways are forming all the time throughout our life. Now, as we're a child, as you can imagine, this happens very quickly. We are the input that we are exposed to, the new learning experiences, are overwhelming, and so our brain very quickly forms these networks and neural networks. It's actually in our teenage years when we start this pruning process. It starts when we're 12 and goes on for girls until they're about 18, for boys into their early 20s. A pruning process that's a bit like trimming a hedge. We would have grown so many brain cells and had so much information put in there. We need to get rid of work out what isn't useful. So we start this pruning process, which starts at the back of your head here in your primitive brain when you're about 12, and then it slowly progresses along your higher cortex and into your prefrontal cortex, which is where your complex thinking happens in your late teens or early 20s. But I digress. I'm not going to talk about too much about that today. So I'm going to explain that your brain is constantly forming, and how you think, how you behave, how you perceive the world, how you perceive yourself is all learned from the influences around you. Right? It's not something you're born with. People who are depressed think in a negative way, and they negatively introspect about themselves, they negatively introspect about the past, and they view the world in a very negative way around them. And this is something they have learnt growing up. And when you think in a negative way, or when you're not doing the things which lead to creating serotonin, which are all positive activity, positive thinking, and positive interaction, then your serotonin levels deplete and you slip further and further and further into depression to a greater or lesser extent. And the more you slip, the less motivation you have, the less you think in a positive way, the harder everything becomes, the more challenging life becomes. And these negative thoughts just keep coming back. Okay? It's a much bigger subject, and I explain more in other modules. But if you have depression, you will understand, you will be able to relate to what I'm talking about these negative thoughts just intruding your mind all the time. That's part of the depression. But it's something that has gradually built up over time. It's something you've gradually formed all through your growing up and through your life. And it can be something that as an adult you hit a bout of depression. It can be something you've grown up learning, but you are not born with it. Now, to throw a bit of a spin into that, a bit of spanner in the works there, we do have these cells called epigenetic cells, or epigenetic cells and epigenetic DNA, which means that they are switched on or off. They are triggered by something. And there is a whole load of research going on at the moment into what triggers epigenetic cells. There are There are millions of different types. They can be cells for cancer, they can be cells for depression or anxiety, but something triggers them. And we have a lot to learn about exactly what all the different things that trigger them. But we know some of the triggers are the way we think and our neurotransmitters and hormones, how we're producing them. Now, we're responsible for what neurotransmitters and hormones we produce by how we think. So that all leads into whether or not we trigger these cells. So it might be that your mother or father were depressed, your grandparents depressed. It might go back generations. That makes perfect sense because you would have spent a lot of time with those people growing up and you will have learned how to think in a certain way that leads to depression. And it might be that it's right through your family. More commonly, some people react with anxiety, some people with depression, and some people with anger. Some people do all three. So you might have people in your family with different ailments. They might have OCD or IBS, or they will have different symptoms of anxiety or depression. But you can bet that if it's in one person in the family, it will be in others. And you can learn how to not have it. You can get yourself out of depression. You can reform the neural pathways in your mind. You can let go of depression forever. And you can learn how. So get in touch. We've seen many, many people with depression. I will put some testimonials at the end of this. You don't have to live with it, and you weren't born with it. But it's up to you to decide you're going to do something about it. Speak to you soon.